Thanks for joining us as we continue our coverage of the search and rescue operation from a sunken ferry off Korea's southwest. It's Tuesday, April 22nd here in Seoul, and I'm Choi Yu-sun. We're now well into the 7th day of search and rescue efforts for the victims of those on board the sunken Sewol-ho ferry. The death toll continues to rise, but no news of survivors. Let's go live to our Ji Myung-gil now, standing by at Paekmokhang Harbor, just 20 kilometers away from the accident site. Myung-gil, fill us in.
Yes, Yu-sun, the death toll officially was exceeded 100 today, with that the atmosphere at the Paekmokhang Harbor has become even grimmer. A dozen more bodies were found on the 3rd and 4th floors of the ferry today, in addition to the 23 bodies recovered there yesterday. Most of the victims retrieved over the past 2 days were high school students who were in the ferry's lounge when the vessel capsized. Bodies of 2 Chinese and 1 Russian passengers were also recovered overnight. Authorities say a lot of unrecovered bodies are believed to be located in the cafeteria of the vessel, as it was breakfast time when the ferry started listing. Nearly 200 people still remain missing inside the sunken ship, and most of them are high school students.
Myung-gil, it seems families are growing desperate. How are they clinging on to their last strands of hope?
As I looked around the Paekmokhang Harbor, a lot of families were in despair as dozens of dead bodies were transported into the harbor. A mother who had lost her daughter burst out in tears while she was attending a Catholic Mass. It seems many people were participating in religious activities, praying for their loved ones. Religious volunteers were here to help people in their time of need, to try and help ease some of their pain and sorrow.
It's truly heartbreaking. I wake up in the middle of the night as the ferry disaster haunts me. The families of the victims say it's really good to have these kinds of religious services as we can pray and share our support.
It's not just the families of victims, but also many others who have come to Paekmokhang Harbor to share in the pain. This was Ji Myung-gil reporting live from Paekmokhang Harbor.
Hundreds of divers have been very heavily involved in the search and rescue operations. The harsh conditions they face have been well documented. Poor visibility, strong currents, and having to bring up the bodies of so many young students makes their work not only physically but emotionally draining. Our Park Ji-won reports.
A rescue diver from the Korean Navy ship salvage unit goes into the water with hopes of finding survivors or the bodies of the fallen. Under the surface, their visibility is limited. Pitch black really, save for an area about 20 centimeters in front of the divers' faces. The situation worsens at night. Despite the help of flares and lighting from fishing boats, divers can barely see, relying instead on distance lines or guidelines. Those lead them inside the sunken ferry and then back to safety. There are hundreds of Navy and private divers on the scene, but each guideline can only be shared by 2 divers. In the early hours of rescue operations, just 3 or 4 divers were able to get into the water because just 1 or 2 guidelines were set up. High waves and strong currents also hampered the rescue operations in the first 48 hours after the accident, which is so-called golden time for rescue operations. After numerous failed attempts, divers finally got inside the ferry on the 5th day of the tragic accident with the help of 5 guidelines that were set up. With tighter currents and waves coming this week, search operations have accelerated. However, divers are still at risk. They face the risk of decompression sickness, known as diver's disease, which took the life of a Navy diver who was participating in search and rescue efforts following the sinking of the warship Cheonan 4 years ago. Despite such risks, rescue divers continue to go into the water with faint hopes of finding a survivor, even though it's now been days since the ferry sank. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
There is no news of any more survivors, but the families of the score still missing continue to wait, clinging to that last bit of hope, camping out in an auditorium in Chindo. And we have a correspondent there at Chindo Indoor Gymnasium. Our Hwang Jie joins us live. Jie, how are the families doing?
Yusan, the families are trying hard to stay calm, but emotions burst from time to time as divers continue to pull out bodies. It's been an agonizing week of waiting for the families here. Many went back and forth from the gymnasium to the Paengmokgang harbor to see what's going on with their own eyes. And while the whole country is clinging on to hope for survivors along with the families here, hundreds of volunteer workers came to the Jindo Gymnasium to offer a helping hand and to help the families desperately waiting for their missing ones to stay strong.
I'm also a parent. I don't know how much these supplies can heal the sorrow of the families, but since they're sent from across the nation, I'm working day and night to distribute them to the families, hoping that they will provide comfort for them, at least a little.
I came here today to support the families here, and because there are already so many volunteer workers, I feel bad that I can't help them anymore.
Well, Jie, we can see families lying in the gymnasium, which looks quite inconvenient for them, and we hear that the government plans to do something about that.
Yes, Yusan. Earlier today, Coast Guard told the families at the podium that the authorities will partition the gymnasium to protect the privacy of the families. But some are saying the authorities are acting too late, with fewer and fewer relatives of the victims staying at the gymnasium now as more bodies are being discovered and identified. The families are leaving to attend to their loved ones. The Coast Guard went on to say that the representatives of the families are now in discussions on how to proceed with funerals. The families still here are clinging onto the hope that survivors will be found as weather conditions improved today. There are notes at the entrance of the gymnasium, and one of them reads, "Come back soon, daughter, so we can have dinner together." It's truly a heartbreaking scene here. This has been Hwang Jie reporting live from the Jindo Auditorium.
So what happened aboard the Seowolho ferry right before it capsized? Investigators are still trying to figure that out, but have unlocked one piece of evidence that may help uncover others. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
For 3 minutes and 36 seconds after 8:48 Wednesday morning, the tracking record for the Seowolho ferry was apparently not connected and not providing information. But the Ministry of Fisheries has restored the record using data from the Mokpo Automatic Identification System-based station. It shows nothing in the first 36 seconds, and a ministry official said that the Seowolho ferry could have experienced a blackout during this time. They believe the AIS device might have been disconnected for that period of time, but restored later using emergency batteries. After that missing 36-second period passes, the tracking record shows that the Seowolho ferry has slowly started turning starboard and then abruptly turned 45 degrees. The official says the events probably unfolded after the ship veered suddenly. At the time of the accident, the ferry was traveling at a normal speed of 17 knots and was about to turn the stern 10 degrees, heading into a treacherous waterway. The Maritime Ministry added that they need to investigate further to see if the capsize was caused due to the reduced dynamic stability of the vessel. If there was an electrical blackout, it could indicate a defect on the ferry and another possible cause of the accident. Kim Jeong, ARIRANG News.
When the Seoul ferry first ran into trouble, most of its passengers followed the instructions given to them by the ship's crew and stayed put inside the vessel. This piece of information has confounded foreign maritime experts who say that decision and the indecisiveness on part of the captain and crew likely doomed hundreds on board. Our Yurian has the details.
Maritime experts describe the announcements on the Seoul ferry instructing people to stay in their rooms at the time of the accident as totally incomprehensible.
In 99.9% cases, the crew is on top of it. They are well trained and they are able to evacuate the ship in plenty of time.
The retired Commodore says it is unacceptable that the captain completely failed in his duties to take control during the crucial moments after the accident.
Key decisions should be made within the captain's mind within 5 to 10 minutes. As soon as he gets a report from all departments of the ship and assesses how much damage is done to the vessel itself.
Logs show that the captain of the Seoul ferry, Lee Jun-seok, delayed evacuation for at least 30 minutes after the ship began to capsize. Others say the announcement telling people to stay where they were actually made the situation worse. Mario Vitone, a former U.S. Coast Guard maritime accident investigator, says if those announcements were not made, the passengers would have gone to the deck to see what was going on. Thad Allen, the former head of the U.S. Coast Guard, also says common sense dictates that when a situation is deteriorating, the crew needs to give up on trying to save the ship and pour efforts into saving the passengers. Yurian, ARIRANG News.
And the investigation into why and how the crew got off the ferry while more than hundreds of passengers were still inside continues. And for details, we now go to our Na Hyun-kyung standing by at the news center. Hyun-kyung?
Well, Yusun, the Gwangju District Court has just issued detention warrants for the 4 additional crew members that were arrested earlier in the day. They are not the 3, including the captain, that were already detained or taken into custody over the weekend. So 7 of the ferry's crew members are now detained. The 4 crew members claim they tried to correct the ferry when it started to list but failed because there was something wrong with the navigation equipment. They also claim that the captain did issue an evacuation order. As for the Korea Coast Guard pointing out the crew's failure to release 14 life floats which they passed on their way to the rescue boats, they said they did try to release the floats but failed because they were out of reach. Each of those life floats could have carried up to 25 people. Earlier in the day, the Coast Guard said it was about 9:30 a.m. Wednesday when the regional rescue team arrived at the accident site. It took the team about 30 minutes to get there, which means Coast Guard officials were aware of the situation at 9 a.m. And when the rescue team arrived, the ferry was already listing 50 to 60 degrees. A prior initial investigation revealed that the crew members started to escape the sinking ship at around 9:37 a.m., which was only about 10 minutes after the passengers were last told to stay put with their life vests on by the crew. As a result, most of the crew members were able to get onto the rescue boats and escape the ferry while hundreds of passengers were going down with the ship. And investigators are also considering charging the crew, some of the crew, with homicide.
Hyun-kyung, multiple factors have caused this tragic accident to happen. One of them, it looks like, could be the ferry's operator.
That's right. The National Tax Service has launched a special probe into reportedly four firms that are closely related to the ferry's operator, Chung Hae-jin Marine Company. The special investigation team earlier in the day also imposed travel bans on 30 additional personnel related to the firm. Now, the prosecution is also looking into whether the operator's management and the family which owns the company have evaded taxes or embezzled funds by making illegal overseas transactions. And the latest travel bans come after the president of the company, Kim Han-sik, and Yoo Byung-eun, former chairman of the company's parent firm, as well as his 2 sons, were banned from traveling this past Sunday. Now, the 2 sons are the biggest shareholders of the operator's holding company, with former chairman Yoo said to be the practical owner of the company. The Yu family reportedly has more than $230 million worth of assets. That's excluding debt and assets kept outside of Korea. And reports say former Chairman Yu established 13 overseas corporate branches and used them to snowball the family's assets. And you saw earlier in the day, Korea's Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, they looked into revoking the ferry operator's business license, as the company's been under investigators' sights ever since the accident happened last Wednesday. And the ministry official says although the capsized ship needs to be salvaged before any conclusion is made on whether the operator indeed contributed to the ferry sinking, the crew's failure to evacuate the passengers is enough to revoke its license. Yusan.
All right, thank you, Hyun-kyung, for that update. The Sewol ferry disaster has raised serious questions about safety awareness here in Korea. Authorities have vowed to punish those responsible for the accident to the full extent of the law. However, records show that in Korea, those who violate maritime regulations often get away. Our Connie Lee has more.
Coast Guard officials flip over a boat after knocking on it in search of survivors. 7 crew members were found dead in this hit-and-run accident. This happened last year in March in the same waters where the Sewol ferry incident took place. And just about 2 weeks ago, authorities caught 6 crew members under the influence of alcohol, steering a boat in the waters around Korea. But even out of the sea waters, more trouble. Last month, authorities found 17 sailors steering ships with illegal licenses. In the past 5 years alone, here in Korea, about 600 people were found dead or missing from maritime accidents, most of them caused by human error. From 2009 to 2013, there were about 1,400 accidents at sea. And out of those, 82% were caused by the crew. Safety violations and negligence were the cause for most of the accidents. Regardless, in those cases, the penalties for the crew would be considered light by most. Most of them were let off with just a warning, while others were suspended from work. Not a single one of the crew members had their licenses revoked. Year after year, light punishments for the many accidents in Korean waters. And now, with Korea's biggest maritime accident in decades at the fore, questions are being raised about whether it's finally time to take sea safety more seriously. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
Korean celebrities are also doing their part to help the victims of the Sewol ferry disaster. LA Dodgers pitcher Ryu Hyun-jin is one of them. He held a special autograph session, proceeds all going to the survivors and families of the deceased. Kim Min-ji has the details.
A long line of baseball fans gather in front of Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles, where pitcher Ryu Hyun-jin is signing autographs to raise funds to support the victims of the Sewol ferry disaster. Korean-American fans who took part in the event said they wanted to help out in any way they could.
It's sad and very depressing. It must be a hard time, but I hope the families do not lose hope.
It was a sentiment shared by all who were there.
Oh, just devastation towards the families, especially when you're talking about such young victims, high schoolers that were on that boat. It's very tragic.
Ryu said that he was keeping up with the news out of Korea, adding that his thoughts were with the victims and their families. He also put up a sign on his locker that read Sewol 4/16/14 in tribute. Ryu has already donated $100,000 through his HJ99 Foundation, earmarked for the Sewol ferry disaster.
I'm hoping for good news. Please take care.
Other Korean celebrities have also been making donations. Figure skating star Kim Yeon-ah gave some $100,000 through UNICEF and tweeted that she prays for a miracle. A list of actors have also made contributions big and small, while some have delivered relief goods to the harbor and auditorium where families have been staying. And all this to express one message, that the families and friends of this horrible disaster are not alone in this very difficult time. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Korea isn't alone in handling the monumental task of combing the Seoul ferry for survivors and bodies. While U.S. President Barack Obama is scheduled to visit Seoul later this week, Washington has made all of its resources in the region available to Korean authorities and has even offered to help determine the cause of the accident. Our Connie Kim reports.
The U.S. remains at the ready to help Korea in this very difficult time. The Pentagon said Monday that the Navy salvage ship USS Safeguard is now sailing to the waters of Korea in case Seoul asks for help with salvage operations once they begin. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board has also pledged to help investigators determine what caused the ferry to sink if requested. The U.S. Navy ship USS Bonhomme Richard, which was conducting routine patrols in Korean waters last week, is already on the disaster site along with its helicopters. President Barack Obama, who is scheduled to arrive in Seoul for a two-day visit later this week, has pledged full support in the ongoing search and rescue operations. The presidential advisor, Ben Rhodes, said this week during a press briefing that the Seoul ferry disaster will take priority during Obama's trip to Seoul. In addition to the Seoul disaster, President Obama and President Park Geun-hye are also expected to discuss North Korea's nuclear program. Rhodes said the door to dialogue remains open for Pyongyang so long as the regime is ready and willing to denuclearize. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
With President Obama arriving in Seoul this Friday, North Korea is showing signs that it may be preparing for a fourth nuclear test. South Korean Defense Ministry spokesperson Kim Min-seok says that increased movement has been detected at the North's Punggye-ri nuclear test site. He adds that Pyongyang is at a stage where it could carry out a nuclear test at any time. South Korea and U.S. forces are closely monitoring the situation, and the South's Defense Ministry and the Joint Chiefs of Staff have also set up an integrated crisis management task force to prepare for a possible test. Experts have speculated recently that a fourth nuclear test could be in the works ahead of Obama's visit to Tokyo and Seoul this week. On the eve of U.S. President Barack Obama's visit to Japan, a group of nearly 150 lawmakers paid respects to the controversial Yasukuni War Shrine for Japan's annual Spring Festival. The group, composed of legislators from several parties and at least one cabinet minister, made the visit on Tuesday, drawing a strong rebuke from both Korea and China. Korea's foreign ministry spokesperson described the trip as deplorable and an anachronistic act that undermines stability in the region. Japan's chief cabinet secretary Yoshihide Suga said earlier that the visits were an individual matter of personal religious freedom and not something the government should interfere with. We now connect live to our Kim Bo-kyung standing by at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, give us an update.
Yusan, not much has changed. Today, rescue operations proceeded with few difficulties from the weather thanks to the mild conditions. Well, currently it's about 13.2 degrees with misty air. Strong winds are blowing at 6.5 meters per second, but that is not an issue as waves remain fairly calm at 0.5 meters. Today through Thursday is when the speed of tidal currents go down to their slowest. Until now, tidal currents moved at a rate of about 2.8 meters per second, but during a neap tide that should fall to a meter per second. The speed of tidal currents should slow down to as slow as 0.5 meters per second during these hours tomorrow, so rescue operations should speed up during those times. Otherwise, the weather outlook on Chindo for tomorrow looks to be more mild than today. Wave heights will fall to half a meter with wind speeds at 4 to 7 meters per second. That's all the weather updates I have for Chindo at this hour, and I'll be back with more after 9.
All right, Po-kyung, and that's all we have for you at this hour. Stay with us for more on day 7 of the sunken ferry search efforts on our next newscast at 9 p.m. Korea time.